Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Monday, March the 1st, 2021, and a happy St. David's Day to my Welsh friends. Donald Trump returned to the political stage, speaking at CPAC. And before I get into his speech, I'm going to talk about a scandal that broke out, which I could hardly believe at first, and which has persuaded me, not that I needed much persuading, that the American elite has gone insane. This is a story from Forbes by Susan Rowan Kelleher, and a reminder, Forbes used to be a serious magazine. It's called How a Nazi Symbol at CPAC Turned into a Massive Hyatt Public Relations Disaster. In a highly unusual step for a major hotel group, Hyatt felt compelled to issue multiple news releases rejecting Nazi symbolism after a politically charged conference was held in one of its hotels. One of the year's marquee events on the GOP calendar, the Conservative Political Action Conference, was held at the Hyatt Regency in Orlando over the weekend. Speakers included high-profile Republicans, including President Donald Trump, who repeated false claims that he won the 2020 election. Early on in the four-day event, outrage erupted over the event's stage design, which drew comparisons to a Norse rune used by Nazis during World War II. A photo of the CPAC stage went viral as thousands of social media users shared posts comparing its distinctive design to an Othala rune. Following World War II, the symbol was adopted by Nazis in an attempt to reconstruct a mythic Aryan past, according to the Anti-Defamation League. Today is commonly seen in tattoo form on flags or banners as part of group logos and elsewhere. Yes. I don't really recall that I'd even heard of this symbol until this weekend. But here we are. By Saturday afternoon, there had been nearly 100,000 tweets comparing the CPAC stage to the Nazi symbol as the Boycott Hyatt hashtag exploded across Twitter and other platforms. Hyatt quickly went into damage control, attempting at first to frame the issue as one of free speech. Journalist Nancy Levine tweeted out a Hyatt statement touting the company's responsibility to provide an inclusive environment for everyone. Quote, "We believe in the right of individuals and organizations to peacefully express their views independent of the degree to which the perspectives of those hosting meetings and events at our hotels align with ours," unquote. Social media users made it clear they believed Hyatt had missed the point. "A platform for hate is not inclusive," Hyatt tweeted one user. Who would that user be? Okay. It's not important. It's not important. I just, journalists used to meet with people for interviews or call people up for interviews. And what they do now is they go on Twitter and they find people who are angry about something. Given the nature of Twitter, there are going to be people angry about everything. But back to the stories. CPAC organizers, meanwhile, disavowed any similarity between the stage design and Nazism. American Conservative Union Chair Matt Schlapp tweeted that such allegations were outrageous and slanderous, noting that the conference included several Jewish speakers. Still, many social media users continued to make an association between CPAC Hyatt and Nazism. One Twitter user tweeted, "Sieg Heil for Hyatt sounds like their new catchy slogan." Scores of memes popped up that blended the Othala rune with the Hyatt logo, sometimes adding a tagline such as "Hyatt, we're okay with Nazis." Yesterday, days into the PR crisis, Hyatt issued the first of two public news releases using tough verbiage. Does she mean verbiage? And making it clear that the public's vitriol should be directed at CPAC organizers, not Hyatt. "We take the concern raised about the prospect of symbols of hate being included in the stage design at CPAC 2020 very seriously, as all such symbols are abhorrent and unequivocally counter to our values as a company, read Hyatt's short statement. The CPAC 2021 event is hosted and managed by the American Conservative Union that manages all aspects of event logistics, including the stage design and aesthetics. We discussed directly with ACU leadership, who told us that any resemblance to a symbol of hate is unintentional. We will continue to stay in dialogue with event organizers regarding our deep concerns. Any further questions can be directed to CPAC. One such statement from a national hotel brand would be remarkable enough, but later that day, Hyatt issued a second, much longer news release. This time, Hyatt's main beef was the refusal of many CPAC attendees to adhere to the hotel's policy on wearing face masks during the COVID-19 pandemic. Hyatt's second news release circled back to the stage divine controversy and what sounded like a venue host's remorse. Quote, had we initially recognized the potential connections to hate symbolism, we would have proactively addressed it prior to commencement of the event. Unfortunately, this became clear to us only after the event kicked off. With CPAC's denial of any intentional connection to hate symbols and our concerns over the safety of guests and colleagues in what could have been a disruptive situation, we allowed the event to continue. We understand and respect the opinions of those who might disagree with that decision. In these polarized times, the debacle serves as a cautionary tale for companies trying to navigate in an ecosystem of starkly divided public opinion. But some might argue that Hyatt should have known better. After all, a major recurring theme of this year's CPAC was cancel culture. I suppose, Hyatt could have responded to this controversy, this debacle, by saying, what? Are you nuts? But no, they didn't. This is from Breitbart, Hannah Blow, actress and left-wing activist Alyssa Milano. Yes, and I can never get enough of that woman and her opinions. Floated a Nazi conspiracy theory directed toward the organizers of CPAC, suggesting that they deliberately fashioned the main stage to match the shape of a Nazi symbol. This is the stage at CPAC. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, Milano wrote in an outrage post to her 2.9 million Twitter followers before tagging Hyatt, where the political convention took place. Hyatt, this is what's happening in your building. Ted Cruz, you stood on this stage. Any particular reason why she's singling out Ted Cruz? Is she disappointed in Ted Cruz? Was she a fan of Ted Cruz? Her conspiracy theory caught fire on social media, drawing remarks from filmmaker Morgan J. Freeman and NARAL president Elise Hogue. Oh, NARAL used to stand for the National Abortion Rights Action League. It doesn't stand for anything anymore because even a pro-abortion organization thinks that the word abortion is a little too spicy. So, here we have an organization which advocates for baby killers, and they're addressing others on morality. Matt Schlapp, chairman of the ACU and lead organizer of CPAC, dismissed the conspiracy theories as outrageous and slanderous. Hyatt also responded to leftists. Yes, we have seen that. In other words, Hyatt is totally fine hosting Nazis. Alyssa Milano responds. Oh, yes, and here is a picture of prominent Nazis, including Heinrich Himmler, next to people at the CPAC conference, or, I don't know, Republicans. Mike Pence is in the photo. Yeah, get it? I'm reminded of something that happened, when was this? In 2017, this is from the Daily Mail. Sarah Silverman has been slammed on Twitter after mistaking a pair of neon orange construction markings for Nazi swastikas. The 46-year-old comedian, who was an outspoken opponent of Donald Trump, wrote on Twitter that she was on her way to get coffee when she noticed the swastikas drawn on the sidewalk. Her followers were quick to point out that the innocuous curvy symbols are common in construction to designate the locations of underground pipes and wires. And of course, a lot of people made fun of her. Sarah Silverman responded, "It's a construction marker, innocent mistake for a Jew that gets burned in an oven at least weekly on Twitter." Still pretty close, though. Yes, they see swastikas everywhere. They see Nazis everywhere. Jason Brantz at The Federalist was very upset about this. This past weekend, the conservative CPAC came to Orlando, a state still open during the COVID-19 pandemic. For the venue, CPAC organizers chose the Hyatt Regency, which saw speeches from President Donald Trump, Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, and Representatives Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz, among others. According to leftist Twitter, the Hyatt also hosted Nazis. But if that was the ostensible goal of CPAC, boy, did it fail. Bad faith Twitter activists like Morgan J. Freeman claimed that the stage at CPAC was purposefully designed to be a rune used by the Nazis. Long-forgotten actress Leah Thompson amplified the smear, declaring, "We need to stop them." Oh, Leah Thompson, you too. Yes, the inexplicably popular Brooklyn Dad Defiant tweeted, "Hyatt and Nazi are trending at the same time because they're hosting a group of white supremacists whose stage is an actual Nazi logo. Guess you Nazi that coming, did you, Hyatt? Ha, 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 ha." Yeah. Again, I'm looking at a picture of the stage here, and I'm thinking, how twisted does your mind have to be to think, yeah, this looks like a Nazi symbol? I think that Brooklyn Dad Defiant gets to the point that the real outrage is not about the stage design or with Hyatt Hotels or CPAC or the American Conservative Union. It is with the Republican Party because they're white supremacists, which equals Nazis. QED. At The Federalist, the writer continues, "We've seen this script before. Soon Twitter activists announced they'd boycott a hotel they likely never patronized to begin with." Sari Beth Rosenberg, a history teacher and host of the PBS NewsHour Extra Teacher Zoom series, sounds exciting, tweeted a boycott threat. "Are you okay with Nazi symbols being used on your property?" She disingenuously asked, "Because if you fail to speak out and do something about this immediately, I'll be sure to no longer patronize any of your properties ever again." Yes, she wants to speak to the manager, apparently. And Jason Rantz reports that, "I've spent the last 3 days at CPAC for a conference full of Nazis. There sure were a lot of Jewish events and Orthodox Jews in attendance. There were 5 Jewish prayer services and 1 dinner event. Young Jewish conservatives hosted a well-attended Shabbat dinner. Groups of Orthodox Jews walked from booth to booth, learning more about how they can help the conservative cause." That leftist Twitter saw a Nazi symbol when actual Jews at this event did not is especially telling. It's safer at CPAC for Jews than in liberal Brooklyn, where you risk random assaults for wearing a yarmulke. Assaults completely ignored by the same people clutching pearls over a stage design. As a Jew, I find it disgusting when our history is exploited by deceitful partisans who use anything they can to silence their political opponents. In truth, they are what can be called the professionally aggrieved, always looking to feign offense and for new ways to use that offense to bludgeon their political opponents. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Random Number Generator, Hikma Warrior, Roulette Cracked, and Hikma Warrior says that America is not a serious country. Anran says Trump's complexion looked really odd in the clips I saw, even for him. Okay, hello to Professor Paul. Hikma Warrior says the Anti-Defamation League has compiled a long list of Nazi symbols. What, the OK symbol? That's a Nazi symbol now, apparently. Cartoon frog. It's a Nazi symbol. The stage itself is emanating hate rays, says Steve. Yes, Random Number Generator had remembered the little incident with Sarah Silverman. Yako Raipala, our Finnish friend, "I've started to believe in horseshoe theory. The woke people do share much of their worldview with the Nazis, including the belief that Viking runic magic is a powerful way to take over the world." That's a good point. That's really a good point because, as I like to say, when people talk about white supremacy, they're really talking about magic more than anything else. William Hicks says, was listening to NPR today as they discussed Governor Cuomo's sex harassment trouble. The host referred en passant to the problems with the nursing homes, calling it a fast developing story. Yes, I'm going to be talking about Cuomo a little later, but I find it amusing or alternately infuriating that, Andrew Cuomo is in trouble now because of alleged sexual harassment. He was not in as much trouble when he was accused of murdering people. So I guess we know what's really important now. Okay. William Hicks, Kevin, would you say New York has more journalists per square mile than any other state? You think some reporter could have called a few nursing homes or drove around to see if the rumors were true? Well, that would require them to do actual work instead of watching YouTube or seeing who is the most upset on Twitter. Yes. And checking out the cool GIFs, of Drake making a funny face or some such. Professor Paul says National Socialism was a reaction to Bolshevism, not Zionism. Nazis originally cooperated with Zionists with Havar Agreement to get German Jews to Palestine. Anran says Gates need a different haircut or style. I won't say anything about his beard. And finally, there were a lot of Jewish Bolsheviks, but they were in conflict with the Zionists and Bundists regarding goals. It's true. Absolutely true. So, this is from the Orlando Sentinel. CPAC. Trump hints at running again in 2024 as a Republican, but only 68% of attendees agree. If you win 55% in a presidential election, that's considered a landslide victory. But apparently, 68% of the attendees at CPAC wanting Trump to run again in 2024 it's shameful. I mean, what a slap down. And let's get to the speech. It is a 91-minute speech. That's too long for a speech. I think Oberon Waugh was right when he said that no speech should be longer than 20 minutes because people stop paying attention after that. Trump begins by talking about wonderful friends, conservatives, and fellow citizens in this room and across the country. I stand before you today to declare that the incredible journey we've begun together, we went through a journey like nobody else. He praises the hardest working people, hardworking American patriots, and in the end, we will win. We will win. Donald Trump likes to blow his own horn, but why don't you give me an example of a politician who does not? He dismisses the idea of starting a third party and says, we will be united and strong like never before. We will save and strengthen America, and we will fight the onslaught of radicalism, socialism, and indeed it all leads to communism once and for all. And windmills. Donald Trump does not like windmills. Well, I don't like windmills either. They're disgusting to the eye, and they are bird abattoirs. I thought we were supposed to like birds. Trump really hammers Biden over immigration. He says, perhaps worst of all, Joe Biden's decision to cancel border security has single-handedly launched a youth migrant crisis that is enriching child smugglers, vicious criminal cartels, and some of the most evil people on the planet. The Biden administration has put the vile coyotes back in business, and it has done so in a very, very big way. Under the new administration, catch and release has been restored. Can you imagine? We work so hard. You catch them, you take their name. They may be killers, they may be rapists, they may be drug smugglers. You take their name and you release them into our country. We did the opposite. The Biden administration is now actively expediting the admission of illegal migrants, enabling them to lodge frivolous asylum claims and admitting them by the thousands and thousands and thousands a day. Then he has a go at the sainted Dr. Anthony Fauci. There's no masks. There's no double mask. That was a new one that came out 2 weeks ago. First, Fauci said, you don't need masks. No mask. No good. No. Then all of a sudden you want them. And now he wants double masks. And it's sad for our country what the Biden administration is doing to push young migrants into the hands of human traffickers. And then the crowd breaks out into a chant of USA. He talks about immigration for a very long time, makes a lot of good points. The Republican Party must hold Joe Biden and the Democrats accountable. They ripped up the diplomatic agreements we negotiated with Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador to shut down illegal immigration. They got a fortune. They got paid $500 million a year. When I came into office, those countries were refusing to take back illegal alien gang members, including MS-13, the most vicious probably of them all. No matter where you go in the world, MS-13, they do things that even the worst don't think about. So I asked, how much do we pay these countries? Sir, we pay them approximately $500 million a year. It's a lot of money. It's not a lot of money in the United States, but it certainly is in Central America. And he took aim at the Biden administration's decision to prioritize transgender athletes. And apparently that was, on the one hand, it's a trivial issue. Well, if it's a trivial issue, why did the Biden administration put it near the top of its priorities? And, who cares? Well, I suppose women athletes care, and those who do not want women shunted out of their spaces, as we call them, care about that. Hey, he talks about the Paris Accord and how useless it is, which is absolutely true. And he hammers on Biden for canceling the Keystone XL pipeline, destroying not the 8,000 or the 9,000 or the 11,000 jobs you hear, but 42,000 great paying jobs on just about day one. He has some fun with Joe Biden, whether you can actually blame him for the things that he says, because does Joe Biden know what he is saying? I talked in the past about Trumpism, and I compared it to Gaullism, which was a political movement in France, which largely ran that country for decades after the retirement of Charles de Gaulle. Trump said, many people have asked, what is Trumpism? A new term being used more and more. I didn't come up with it, but what it means is great deals, great trade deals. And he talks about USMCA replacing the horrible NAFTA. Did you see grain prices and grain sales are at an all-time high? Wheat all-time high. So many elements of farms and farmers. They love me. Remember, it's going to be very close in Iowa. It wasn't close. We wanted a landslide Iowa because our farmers know and they put up with it. And we did a lot of work with the tariffs. Trumpism means low taxes and eliminating job-killing regulations. It means strong borders, but people coming into our country based on a system of merit. He talks about Biden kowtowing to the Chinese. And it's funny to me that who would be on the side of China right now? Well, the Democrats are on the side of China, and the media is on the side of China. Because as Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, once pointed out, in China, they get things done. Yes, the trains run on time, apparently. He talks about voting reform, and I have to be very careful about what I say here. Oh, and he takes a shot at the warmonger, a person that loves seeing our troops fight, fighting, Liz Cheney. How about that? The good news is in her state, she's been censored, and in her state, her poll numbers have dropped faster than any human being I've ever seen. I suppose that Liz Cheney is making an early bid for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. But I'm thinking, yes, American soldiers need to be involved in more forever wars. Is that really a winning slogan? I don't think it's a winning slogan. But let's see. Chris Cillizza, CNN editor-at-large, has something on CNN politics. And yeah, I think it was Jim Kunstler who pointed out that snark has largely replaced political analysis. And the piece is called The 50 Most Ridiculous Lines from Donald Trump's CPAC Speech. Do you miss me yet? Do you miss me? At root, Trump wants to be loved forever, and away we go. Yeah. Politicians want to be liked. Do they want to be loved? I stand before you today to declare the incredible journey we've begun together. We went through a journey like nobody else. There's never been a journey like it. Never been a journey that incredible? These two dogs and a cat would disagree, which is a reference to a 1963 Walt Disney film. He wants windmills, the windmills that don't work when you need them. Trump has been consistent about very few things in his life. His hatred of windmills is one of them. We had built about 500 miles of great border wall that helped us with these numbers, because once it's up, they used to say a wall doesn't work. The total amount of new wall built in our southern border by Trump, about 80 miles, according to the BBC. Well, the BBC is lying. Oh, there was a wall there already. No, there was a gate. A gate is not the same thing as a wall. I've seen these gates, and you can climb over them, or you can crawl under them. Not the same as a wall. Trump said COVID-19, or as I call it, the China virus. The CPAC crowd cheered and applauded after this, which tells you everything you need to know. Did he burst into tears as he was writing that? They are not giving us their best and their finest. Remember, I said that. I said that a long time ago when I made the first remarks, when I came down the escalator with our great future First Lady. Cillizza says, remember when Republicans insisted that Trump was disqualified after he said that Mexico was sending people, bringing drugs, bringing crime? They're racist. Now he is touting that he was right. Well, he also said some of them, I'm sure, are fine people. And it goes on and on and on. You remember in 2016, after November the 8th, when a large part of America and pretty much all of the elite had a collective nervous breakdown? Well, normality has returned to America, and political hack Joe Biden is now president of the United States. You think that these people would be feeling a little bit better. Nope. They're even more hysterical than they were 5 years ago, which is really hard to believe. Seems to be just a feedback loop. Let's go back to the chat here. Hello to Neil Terry. Victoria Newland was passing out bags of cookies to open neo-Nazis in Kiev in 2014, says Aurelio Klevich. Yeah. One would have thought that the media would take an interest in the Ukraine story, which is the Ukraine has been run since the American-led coup by a coalition of oligarchs and actual neo-Nazis. Yeah, pretty strange, huh? Professor Paul says most academic conferences enforce the 20-minute maximum for normal oral presentations. Dan Allison says, can't understand why anyone would want Trump to run again. Of course, I always vote against the baby killer party, but the guy did not deliver for us, same old speech. Well, it seemed to me that he delivered in terms of immigration. Numbers coming to the United States collapsed both legal and illegal during Trump's presidency. Okay. Repeal the 19th and ban females in journalism, says Hikma Warrior, who is pretty hardcore. Random number generator says Biden is literally semi-conscious at this point. Yeah, going back to the State of the Union address, which did not occur in February. Oh, no, we never said it was. Well, you did, but, I think the problem is the State of the Union address normally lasts, with all the interruptions and applause and the pointing out of the heroic people that, that their heroism is going to come onto you. It normally lasts about 90 minutes or so, and Joe Biden seems to be good for 5 minutes at best. Teddy Saginaw says, Iowa farmers hire illegals. Remember Molly Tibbetts? Yes, I do. I feel sorry for that woman who was murdered by an illegal immigrant. But she's one of those women who seems to be drawn to men that, pretty obvious that you should stay away from. Okay, moving on. Yes. Let's talk about transgenderism in sports. This is from Dylan Gwynn at Breitbart. Former President Trump blasted the Democratic Party on Sunday for endangering women's sports by allowing transgender athletes to compete against biological women. Trump emphasized that we must protect the integrity of women's sports. Trump's call to protect women's health and their athletic achievements from being harmed or corrupted by biological males infiltrating their sports drew widespread backlash from liberal elites in politics, entertainment, and media. TMZ Sports, there's a TMZ Sports now? Ridiculously claimed that Trump's attack was directed at the transgender community. No, one must never take aim at them. Jeff Charlotte, he's the author of The Family, now a Netflix series. Okay. Here comes the transphobia, he tweeted. Women's sports, says Trump, relishing and twisting the words. If this is not changed, women's sports as we know it will die. We must protect the integrity of women's sports, he says, tying transphobia to election integrity. PBS White House correspondent Yamiche, I may be mispronouncing your name, Alcindor, decided to ignore the health and well-being of female athletes by trying to twist Trump's comments into an attack on the transgender community. And here's that flag, the ubiquitous flag. New York Times Washington correspondent Maggie Haberman whiffed entirely in a vain attempt to misrepresent Trump's comments as mocking trans women. Breitbart, the planted axiom here is that everyone loves the transgender community, and this is simply not true. Steve Silberman, who is the author of Neurotribes, The Legacy of Autism and the Future of Neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is what we used to call insanity. Silberman tweets, this times 1,000. The GOP is the party of alleged rapists like Donald Trump, pedophile enablers like Jim Jordan, and unrepentant abusers like Brett Kavanaugh. I suppose if the United States had any defamation laws, worth their name, Steve Silberman would be in a lot of trouble. Their attack on trans people is crude, ham-handed misdirection that would not fool Penn and Teller. Oh, Penn and Teller. Yes, the ultimate authorities. Some, like Politico columnist Jeff Greenfield, took the snarky road, though it is amazing the speed at which the health and safety of women became the source of mockery and scorn for the left. Greenfield tweeted, oh boy, Trump is zeroing in on the key issue of our time, transgendered athletes as a threat to women's sports. I've been following Greenfield's work since the 1970s? I always thought that he was a smart person, but in his old age, he's decided to become an idiot. The Blades' Chris Johnson apparently never had his first place trophy taken by someone who was biologically bigger, faster, and stronger than him. Wow. Trump found a way to get fears about transgender kids in sports in his CPAC speech. Okay. And yeah, okay. Yeah. This is a really winning issue for the right. I mean, you've seen the pictures, you've seen the videos. You have, on the one hand, a woman, clearly a woman, and on the other hand, you have some hulking beast. Oh, that's a woman too? Huh. Doesn't look like any women I've ever seen. It's a woman, you bigot. Okay. Let's talk about Senator Mazie Hirono, who what is this woman? She is like Japan's revenge for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is from Pam Key at Breitbart. Sunday on ABC's This Week, Senator Mazie Hirono blamed former President Donald Trump's rhetoric on the coronavirus for an increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans. Anchor George Stephanopoulos said, "You were the first Asian American woman elected to the Senate, a striking surge in anti-Asian hate crimes here in America. Why is this happening, and what should be done about it?" Hirono said, "It's happening because we didn't have leadership at the top, starting from President Trump, calling it the China virus and the Kung flu and all of that, which apparently it unleashed this kind of targeted hate crimes against Asian Americans, and the increase is dramatic. Just last week in New York, a person who was just walking down the street got knifed. He is in serious condition. Shortly thereafter, 4 people walking in New York were knifed. 1 died. In California, you have incidents of 90-year-old people being knocked down, attacked. That person died." Oh, so if I understand this correctly, a bunch of black men attack Asian people in the United States, and this is Donald Trump's fault. I think that Senator Hirono is well aware of the fact that the phenomenon of Black on Asian violence is not a new one, but she pretends otherwise. A piece by Donald H. Oliver in the Globe and Mail. I never heard of this fellow, but he served in the Senate of Canada from 1990 to 2003. With Black History Month just behind us and fresh in our minds, it's certainly fresh in my mind, it's a good time to ask whether Canadians genuinely came out in large numbers to recognize and celebrate the contributions of Black Canadians and to search out creative ways of combating systemic anti-Black racism. Well, once again, according to the 1971 census, there were 34,400 Black people in Canada in 1971. There is little, if any, Black history in Canada to speak of. We can also ask, has the Black Lives Matter movement and the heinous knee-on neck killing of George Floyd, witnessed in real time around the globe last year, aroused a desire to seek out the untold stories of almost forgotten Black communities, such as Amber Valley in northern Alberta and Willow Grove in New Brunswick? Amber Valley was once the largest Black community in Western Canada. Note that Senator Oliver does not mention how many people lived in Willow Grove. There was also some encouraging evidence that books and articles by Black authors and scholars were sold out or all spoken for. Really? Black video, stories rich in Black history and Black art in all its forms were all hard to come by because the demand was so strong. So this is a fellow who, yes, he talks about George Floyd and he talks about W.E.B. Du Bois, or Dubose, however that's pronounced. Of course, they're both Americans, and their stories happened in the United States. That among Canadian leftists, there is this tremendous desire to believe that slavery existed in Canada, that Canada had Jim Crow laws, that dogs were sicked on Black protesters on a bridge, that sort of thing. Of course, it never happened. Oliver writes that Black History Month must continue to live every day with the constant reminder that Black Canadians are different from most other Canadians. I believe the defining test of systemic racism in Canada is when I no longer have to somehow prove that I, a Black Canadian, am worthy to participate in and enjoy all the fruits, benefits, and perks of daily living that have been bestowed on the white majority by virtue of their privilege. Well, Canada was a country that was created by white people, British people, and French people. They came to a continent where there was nothing, and they built a civilization. Yeah, that apparently is the basis of their white privilege. Here we have a man who was appointed to the Senate of Canada who is whining about how, oh, he has to prove something or other. No, he doesn't. He doesn't at all. But you can see how Black Lives Matters has just been a disaster for Black people. That it's encouraging them to think that everyone hates them, that everyone wants to harm them, that white devils are ruining their lives. You know, I can tell you from personal observation that the state of race relations in the United States is much, much worse than it was in the 1960s. Much, much worse. This paranoia, this deranged belief that all white people are obsessed with Black people. I mean, it's sad, but it's also dangerous. Here's a story from Amanda Prestigiacomo at the Daily Wire. Conservatives are sounding the alarm about an updated Amazon policy that bans books the ubiquitous billion-dollar company deems offensive or includes so-called hate speech. As noted by the Daily Wire, Amazon has ramped up its censorship on conservative views in recent weeks. For example, a popular documentary on U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was banned from their streaming service this past week. I guess Justice Thomas is too white adjacent. Before that move, the company deplatformed conservative Ryan Anderson's book, Critical of Gender Theory, when Harry became Sally, responding to the transgender movement. When Just the News reached out to Amazon over the ban on Anderson's book, the outlet says the company directed them to a page outlining their content guidelines for books. Under a section labeled offensive content, Amazon states that they, quote, don't sell certain content, including context that we determine is hate speech, promotes the abuse or sexual exploitation of children, contains pornography, glorifies rape or pedophilia, advocates terrorism, or other material we deem inappropriate or offensive, unquote. Daily Wire podcast host and conservative author Matt Walsh warned that the designation from Amazon broadened to include conservative views, as it seems to be leaning, could lead to the potential end of conservative books. Yes, he tweeted, if Amazon decides to label conservative books hate speech, that's effectively the end of conservative books. Publishers won't bother publishing books that can't be sold on Amazon. This is a hugely important issue. I don't think it's getting all the attention it deserves. Author and critic of progressive gender theory, Abigail Schreier, posted a lengthy thread offering a similar warning, emphasizing Amazon's reach. We're really not making a big enough deal of the fact that Amazon has begun deleting books, she said on Saturday. Amazon now claims the right to bar all books that are inappropriate or offensive. Of course, nearly every book worth reading could be characterized as inappropriate or offensive to someone. But also, Amazon is manifestly dishonest about censoring books that are offensive or inappropriate. They continue to sell books like this, which discusses very young children performing fellatio. And it's a book called Beyond Magenta, Transgender Youth Speak Out, something like that. Yeah. Books that surprise and inform and challenge us, Schreier says differently, are usually offensive to someone. In the short term, sounding the alarm may increase sales of a particular book, but this is a dangerous move, and we are all too complacent about it. When a company controls over 83% of the market for books, it begins the process of deleting ideas from a society. A bookseller can sell whatever it wants. If Marxist Books wants to sell only books that conform to its ideology, okay, that has integrity. But this is the world's largest bookseller. Amazon can basically make books disappear for all readers and does so on a blatantly dishonest basis. Under guise of removing inappropriate content, they will really be removing ideas they disfavor. And listeners, it's about time. You know, if you've ever wondered if you want a copy of something, you might want to buy it now because it may not be available for sale soon enough. And you remember the New York Times science reporter who was sacked because some snotty teenagers were upset about comments that he made during a trip to Peru. And I guess there's a lesson there. Don't speak to snotty teenagers, or probably a good idea not to speak to teenagers at all. This is from the Wrap. Former New York Times reporter Donald McNeil Jr. spoke out about his ouster on Monday, the first day of his official separation from the paper where he worked since the 1970s. He described the sharp-edged jackal nature of journalists and said he had been surprised to be subjected to the same vigorous process of inquiry that journalists apply to others. Since January 28th, I've been a jackal circled by jackals, he wrote on Medium. I'm somewhat relieved to be out of the game, McNeil wrote, after he became a story himself over his behavior on a Times-sponsored trip to Peru with high school students, including his his use of the N word. I'm looking at his piece here on Medium. He notes, at my departure, I was the paper's lead reporter on the COVID-19 pandemic. I had been at the Times since starting as a copy boy in 1976. Since the Daily Beast wrote to the Times on January 28th saying it intended to publish a story, I have not spoken in detail to any reporter. That's the business that the media is in now, issuing blackmail threats. So he is now officially gone, and so he is speaking out. He writes, I know journalists, we make America what it is. Without a free press, democracy dies, but we're still jackals. We can befriend you for years and then bite off your arm just as you're offering us a treat. We can't help it. It's the nature of the job. At the highest levels, like Watergate, it's about digging for the truth, no matter what corrupt government official it hurts. At the basis level, when even the crummiest scandal erupts, you have to repeat the accusation, even if you know it's untrue or half true, in order to explain the truth, no matter how much you may personally like the source you're hurting. That's the game. I'm somewhat relieved to be out of it, but after 50 years, if you count writing for my high school magazine, I'll probably never be able to shake the habits. Even just 5 words I foolishly sent in writing to a reporter came back to bite me. On January 28th, the day the Daily Beast story broke, I'd been ordered to not speak to the Beast or return any phone calls from the press. I did not. Emails poured in asking for comment. To one from the Washington Post, I wrote back only, don't believe everything you read. It was meant to flippantly convey, I can't comment, but don't believe the Daily Beast. Instead, the Washington Post reporter interpreted it as don't believe the Times press release. That inflamed the situation. Am I principled, old school, blunt, cranky, or to the end of the asshole era at the Times? As Vanity Fair let an anonymous source describe me, was I speaking to innocent school children or to privileged prep schoolers burnishing their resumes? Am I a longtime science reporter, a veteran science reporter, a star reporter, a legendary reporter? During February, without having published a single article, I won battlefield promotions from longtime to legendary from a dozen reporters who described me for their own purposes without ever speaking to me. McNeil asks, am I really an asshole? I don't think so, not most of the time. I'm someone who holds doors for people, schmoozes with anyone, shovels my neighbor's sidewalks, occasionally buys lunch in the cafeteria for strangers who forget their credit cards, counsels colleagues in trouble with their editors, talks up the guild to newbies, walks through the newsroom on flu shot day, reminding everyone I pass on story ideas, share my sources, and don't hog bylines. I eat or ate lunch at a roving cafeteria table, nicknamed the Alta Cakers table, made up of reporters and editors from many departments. We welcome everyone to sit down with us, Some young reporters do, and they get an earful of jokes, foreign correspondent yards, and Times gossip, ancient and modern. We're a little noisy, but we're friendly. Yes, McNeil he's very much an old school journalist. One of the reasons why people went into journalism was because it was fun. Journalists were not always witch finders general, but they are now. McNeil is clearly a liberal, and he devotes a large part of his essay to demonstrating that he is a liberal. Well, the age of liberalism is over, and McNeil doesn't seem to realize it. Listing his bona fides in racial or cultural matters is not going to help him. He's only digging it deeper. But there's one particularly funny thing that jumped out to me. He says, just last week, I bemoaned to a friend the fix that God and Adolf had gotten me into. Only after I reread it did I realize how that might be misread, and quickly sent a follow-up. I meant Adolf Ochs. Yes, the founder of the Times. But we're dealing with a journalistic culture which now claims to see Nazi symbols in a floor arrangement. So one can't be too careful. And I guess the lesson is just to not speak to journalists ever. From Pam Key at Breitbart, New York Times correspondent Maggie Haberman said on Monday on CNN's New Day that Governor Andrew Cuomo's apology after a second former aide accused him of sexual harassment was breathtaking. In a statement released Sunday, Cuomo said, "I acknowledge some of the things I have said have been misinterpreted as an unwanted flirtation. To the extent anyone felt that way, I'm truly sorry about that." It's not really an apology, is it? Haberman said, "Look, hearing Andrew Cuomo apologize for anything is breathtaking. I've covered him on and off for 20 years, and I can't remember another time when he has done that. I think it speaks to the degree to which he knows he is in real trouble." Yes, once again, killing people, not a big problem. Harassing women, big problem. This is from the New York Post. Andrew Cuomo on Sunday tried to explain away allegations of sexual harassment as jokes that were misinterpreted as unwanted flirtation, as his office caved on the state attorney general's request to appoint an investigator to probe the claims. At work sometimes I think I am being playful and make jokes that I think are funny. I do on occasion tease people in what I think is a good-natured way, Cuomo said in a prepared statement. I now understand that my interactions may have been insensitive or too personal, and that some of my comments, given my position, made others feel in ways I never intended. I acknowledge some of the things I have said have been misinterpreted as an unwanted flirtation. To the extent anyone felt that way, I am truly sorry about that. Andrew Cuomo is such an ugly and fearsome-looking man. He talks about making jokes. I think with someone like that, he would pretty much need to hold up a sign that says, "This is a joke." Because, we've heard all sorts of stories about how everyone was terrified of Andrew Cuomo. And now, of course, that he's been knocked to the ground, people feel a little more courageous in speaking out against him. Speaking of courage or lack thereof, here's a story from Reuters. Exactly a year after New Zealand recorded its first coronavirus case, the biggest city of Auckland woke on Sunday to a second lockdown this month as authorities try to rein in a cluster of the more contagious UK variant. The 7-day lockdown of a population of nearly 2 million, announced late on Saturday by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, was prompted by the case of a person who had been infectious for a week but not in isolation. One case. And you lock down a city of 2 million people, well, for 3 weeks because of one case. New Zealand is now officially the most sissified country on earth. It is more than likely there will be additional cases in the community, Ardern told a televised news conference, although no new cases were recorded Sunday. The move follows a 3-day stay-at-home order in mid-February after the UK variant of the virus that causes COVID-19 emerged in New Zealand. About 14 cases are linked to the cluster. Despite our best efforts to date, recent cases have gone to work when they shouldn't have, Ardern said. Opposition leader Judith Collins urged tougher penalties for those who do not follow advice on isolation. No one wants to be yo-yoing in and out of lockdown, Collins said. The new lockdown, part of Level 3 curbs, lets people leave home only for essential shopping and work, while public venues will stay shut. Curbs elsewhere in New Zealand are to be tightened to Level 2, setting limits on public gatherings. The measures have disrupted several key events set for Auckland next week. The America's Cup yacht race was postponed on Sunday, and the 2020 international cricket match has been shifted to Wellington to be played behind closed doors on Friday. One case. Oh, we have some news from Finland. Again from Reuters, the Finnish government declared a state of emergency on Monday due to rising COVID-19 infections, a step that would allow the Nordic country to shutter restaurants and to impose other measures to blunt the pandemic. The decision comes as new variants contribute to a sharp rise in infections in the country, which has already closed its borders. The state of emergency would also allow the government to further shut schools and limit movement between regions. The government sees it necessary that we all have fewer contacts, Prime Minister Sanna Marin told a news conference. Everyone now has the opportunity to impact how the spring and summer will turn out. Finland, among the European countries least affected by the virus so far, has recorded 58,064 cases and 742 deaths since the start of pandemic, with 210 people currently hospitalized. How many lockdowns, how many cycles of lockdowns do there have to be before we understand that lockdowns don't work? I mean, New Zealand was patting itself on the back, and everyone was praising New Zealand. Oh, Jacinda Ardern, I wish you were president of the United States. Oh, yes, and they get one case, and they shut down a city of 2 million people. The incidence of coronavirus in New Zealand has been so small as to be barely a nuisance. But it results in a situation where the opposition leader is saying, you're not being tough enough. I mean, what's the final stage? That everyone is locked into their living places 24/7 and the army delivers food? Is that where we're heading? Let's take another look at the chat. I would vote for the Ayatollah over Biden, says random number generator. Yakorai Paula says Helsinki going to lockdown for weeks because there are a couple of dozen people in hospital. Yeah. The writer's story didn't mention how many people were in intensive care units. Random number generator. I see a good hemp market there, if you know what I mean. Apparently, Josh Rogan is getting into the marijuana business. Exciting news. Okay. And let's go to, oh, yes, some good news from Britain, where despite the police getting very angry with people sitting in public outside, from the Daily Mail, lockdown Britons flock to parks and beaches in 59 degrees Fahrenheit sunshine, despite warnings to stay at home as infections plummet by 28% in a week to under 7,500, the lowest since October 2nd. Deaths dropped by a third to 290, and 19.6 million are vaccinated. And I'm looking at a picture here, Primrose Hill in London, and I'm seeing about 1,000 people in a rather small area. Perhaps sanity is returning to Britain. John Redwood has been an MP in Britain for decades. Quite an intelligent man. He has a piece on his blog, johnredwoodsdiary.com. The UK government has rightly worried about deaths from COVID-19. It has used these concerns, along with worries over hospital capacity, to treat seriously ill COVID-19 patients to drive its anti-pandemic lockdown policies. The government has repeatedly said it wishes to be data-driven. This requires consistent and accurate data over time to help inform policy decisions. I first took up issues of data adequacy with the government on April the 11th, 2020. I reiterated and enlarged my concerns on this site on April 26th, May 22nd, November 7th, and at other times. I asked how the UK defined a death caused by COVID-19, how it handled deaths with COVID-19 where it was not the main cause of death, and what use it made of deaths attributed to or with COVID-19 when there had been no test on a patient to establish they had the disease. We now know from the public daily reporting that the UK has adopted a standard of notifying COVID-19 linked to a death if the patient has had COVID-19 during the 28 days prior to death, whatever health problems they also experienced. Others have now taken this up. People have come forward to complain that their relatives did not think their family member died of COVID-19, yet it appeared on the death certificate. Doctors have explained that in some cases mistakes were made. In some cases, the death certificate correctly identified other causes of death, but needed to cite the presence of COVID-19 at some point during the last 28 days of life. These figures matter as people make international comparisons without being able to adjust the figures for the differing criteria adopted to define a COVID-19 death. If you're going to be data-driven, you need to understand what your data means and understand any weaknesses or possible errors in its compilation. He concludes, I suggest the government sets some data specialists onto the task of auditing these figures and adjusting where necessary. It does not seem fair to the National Health Service to leave the world with the impression that Britain had a higher death rate from this disease, given the many queries of death attribution we are now seeing. As many of the people who were recorded as dying of COVID-19 were over 80, they belong to the generation that is likely to have other medical conditions that have been the cause of death. I see Dr. Bonnie Henry has been under fire because she does not believe that school children should be wearing masks. And so I guess that makes British Columbia Canada's Florida. To compare the deaths from COVID-19 in any province in Canada to Florida does not strike me as being particularly useful for several reasons. One is that the median age of the population is higher in Florida than it is in Canada. Two, the general level of health is higher in Canada than it is in Florida. And three, people in Florida are overall much, much fatter than Canadians. And we know that obesity is perhaps the single greatest correlation to the chances of one dying of COVID-19. Let's go to Lockdown Skeptics by Connor Chaplin today. Arrival of the Brazilian variant. How many of these variants are there going to be? And is the media going to get hysterical about every single one of them? Police giving up on outdoor gatherings, and a departure from some of the recent fighting talk from police officials and some reports of officious behavior by cops. The chairman of the Metropolitan Police Federation has said that the police are neither willing nor able to patrol outdoor gatherings. Well, I'm glad to hear that. UK orders 30 million doses of single-shot Johnson & Johnson jab. Following on from Chris Whitty and the General Medical Council's comments regarding vaccine uptake in the medical profession, a reader has expressed his worries about the implication for the trust between doctors and patients. This dawned on him after a conversation with his goddaughter, a medical student. My goddaughter is a medical student in her final year. She has recently received the Pfizer vaccine, not entirely willingly. Her experience is consistent with reports of doctors facing pressure and even disciplinary action if they refuse a COVID vaccine. Doctors who don't want to receive this new vaccine treatment but are finally coerced into it are doing so presumably to protect their jobs and their careers. This should be a very frightening prospect for patients. What it essentially does is cast doubt on how much we can trust those doctors. And I will move on now to Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. Just hang on a second. Here we go. And I see that Berenson has a book on COVID-19. He has a contract with Regnery. I suppose the leading conservative publication. Is this going to be one of those books which is going to be banned for being offensive? Berenson has some information on COVID vaccine mid-late term miscarriage and stillborn reports. I have to be very careful what I say about this. The Hill reports Twitter will begin labeling posts that contain misinformation about COVID-19 vaccines. Twitter announced Monday that it will begin labeling posts. The labels will alert users that health officials consider vaccines for the novel coronavirus to be safe for most people. They may also contain links to content from trusted sources on vaccines. Twitter is also implementing a strike system for its broader policy on coronavirus vaccine misinformation, where more than one violation will lead to accounts being locked and 5 or more will trigger permanent suspensions. We believe the strike system will help to educate the public on our policies and further reduce the spread of potentially harmful and misleading information on Twitter, particularly for repeated moderate and high severity violations of our rules. Labels will be first applied by humans, but Twitter is aiming to have automated systems do the same task. Oh, won't that be fun? The platform already has rules around more general coronavirus misinformation. Twitter said in Monday's blog post it has removed more than 8,400 tweets and challenged 11.5 million accounts worldwide under these rules. So I'm going to return to James Burnham's The Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom. And we're talking about Robert Michels on leadership and how this is essential, that the masses don't run things, leaders do. Burnham writes, at a typical stage in this psychological metamorphosis, the leader identifies himself with the group, party or nation, or whatever the group may be. The bureaucrat identifies himself completely with the organization, confounding his own interests with its interest. All objective criticism of the party or nation, if he is the leader of a nation, is taken by him as a personal affront. This is the cause of the obvious incapacity of all party leaders to take a serene and just view of hostile criticism. If, on the other hand, the leader is attacked personally, his first care is to make it appear that the attack is directed against the party or nation as a whole. Criticism of the group is personal libel against the leader. Criticism of the leader is subversion and treason against the group. The despotism of the leaders, moreover, does not arise solely from a vulgar lust of power or from uncontrolled egoism, but is often the outcome of a profound and sincere conviction of their own value and of the services which they have rendered to the common cause. These psychological changes are themselves part of a larger process frequent in the development of democracy, the process of the growth that what Michels and others called Bonapartism, a name derived from the regimes of the two Bonapartes, particularly from that of Napoleon III. The despotic Bonapartist rule was not theoretically based, like most monarchies, upon any claims of God-given right or inheritance. The theoretical and also the historical basis was democratic. Democratic form was carefully and consistently preserved. Both Napoleons ruled as democratic representatives of the governed, the people. Their democratically legitimate right to act as delegates of the people's will was confirmed in a series of broad plebiscites. The first Napoleon was overwhelmingly elected as consul for life, and then 1804 as emperor. The second, twice as president, and finally 1852 as emperor. Michels writes, Napoleon III did not merely recognize in popular sovereignty the source of his power, He further made that sovereignty the theoretical basis of all his practical activities. He made himself popular in France by declaring that he regarded himself as merely the executive organ of the collective will manifested in the elections, and that he was entirely at the disposition of that will, prepared in all things to accept its decisions. With great shrewdness, he continually repeated that he was no more than an instrument, a creature of the masses. Burnham comments, the Bonapartist leader claims, with more than a show of justification, to be the most perfect embodiment of the will of the group, the people. Everything, therefore, is permitted to him since he is merely the symbol of the group as a whole. The intermediary political organs, parliaments, for example, still continue, but they are now subordinate to the Bonapartist leader. For only he completely expresses the popular will. They are his agents, and only through him are they agents of the people. Michels writes, once elected, the chosen of the people can no longer be opposed in any way. He personifies the majority, and all resistance to his will is anti-democratic. The leader of such a democracy is irremovable, for the nation, having once spoken, cannot contradict itself. He is, moreover, infallible. It is reasonable and necessary that the adversaries of the government should be exterminated in the name of popular sovereignty, for the chosen of the people acts within his rights as representative of the collective will, established in his position by a spontaneous decision. It is the electors themselves, we are assured, who demand from the chosen of the people that he should use severe repressive measures, should employ force, should concentrate all authority in his own hands. Burnham concludes, all this is much more than mere pretense. Once granted the principle of representation, Bonapartism can be regarded as the logical culmination of democracy. More than this, to judge from the experience not only of our own times, but that of the Greek city-states, the Roman Republic, and the medieval city-states, Bonapartism is likewise the normal, though not perhaps the invariable, historical culmination of democracy. Bonapartism, in one or another stage of development, is the most striking and typical political structure of our day. The great nations, which in the period since the Renaissance adopted democratic political formulas and representative parliamentary practices, have without exception in this century exhibited a powerful tendency toward Bonapartism, a tendency which in Germany, Russia, and Italy has gone to full maturity, but which has also been plainly marked in, for example, England and the United States. It is a grave historical error to identify Bonapartism with other forms of despotism. Bonapartism is not mere military dictatorship. It is not the traditional hereditary or God-derived despotism of absolute monarchies. It is not the oligarchical rule of the closed hereditary caste. Mature Bonapartism is a popular, democratic despotism founded on democratic doctrine and, at least in its initiation, committed to democratic forms. If Bonapartism, in fact, rather than in theory, denies democracy, it does so by bringing democracy to completion. And tomorrow I will begin to speak about Michels' iron law of oligarchy. Oh, yes. Let's talk about Meghan Mertz and her husband, Prince Harry. Sensational interview with Oprah Winfrey coming up. One might get the impression, reading the stories about Meghan and Harry, that this couple is extraordinarily popular in the United States. My own experience going to the gossip sites is that they are not popular at all, at least among those people who comment on gossip sites, such as Blind Gossip, to give one example. This is from Deadline.com. The first two promos are out for the eagerly awaited, except possibly at Buckingham Palace, Oprah Winfrey interview with the Duke and Duchess, which has not been this is an error in the text, which has now been extended to 2 hours. Billed as Oprah with Meghan and Harry, a CBS primetime special, the clips bowed during the iNetwork's 60 Minutes news magazine. The network will air the primetime interview with Meghan Mertz and Prince Harry from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday, March the 7th. Only Winfrey and Prince Harry speak in the promos, with Winfrey teasing bombshell revelations. You've said some pretty shocking things here, she says at one point. She is also seen asking the duo whether they were silent or silenced and inquiring about a breaking point, likely connection to their decision to leave the UK. Harry references the fate of his late mother, Princess Diana. She was the Princess of Wales, not Princess Diana. Yes, I suppose I'm a pedant. My biggest concern was history repeating itself, Harry says. I'm really relieved and happy to be sitting here talking to you with my wife by my side, because I can't begin to imagine what it must have been for her going through this process by herself all these years ago, because it's been unbelievably tough for the two of us, but at least we have each other. Unbelievably tough. Yeah. Shameless. Absolutely shameless. Per CBS, the interview will see Winfrey speak with Mertz about everything from stepping into life as a royal, marriage, motherhood, her philanthropic work, and how she is handling life under intense public pressure. Later, the two will be joined by Prince Harry as they speak about their move to the United States and their future hopes and dreams for their expanding family. The interview comes a year after the couple moved to the U.S. and became independent from the royal family. Since they have relocated to California, the pair have signed lucrative deals with Netflix and Spotify. The Queen recently stripped them of royal patronages after a one-year review of the so-called Megxit deal, in which the couple wanted to step back from public life but still serve and retain some privileges. Reports indicate Queen Elizabeth declared that the half-in, half-out approach was not be compatible with the established protocols for the monarchy. The fellow who writes the site called Harry Markle has been saying for some months now that the Mertz debacle might lead to the end of the monarchy in Britain and, of course, elsewhere. Canada, for instance. I used to think that this was hyperbole, but I no longer do. This couple should have been slapped down hard and immediately, stripped of all of their titles, His Royal Highness, Duke, Duchess, etc. But no, this was not done, perhaps because it was thought to be too cruel. Let's see. Harry Markle writes, the corny Corden, that would be James Corden show, was the warm-up for the Oprah interview, and it was designed to be lighthearted, to show how cool Harry and Meg's are. The contrived tomfoolery made people think they were victims who survived the ordeal of, well, actually, I'm unsure what ordeal they suffered. Meghan Mertz did less than 80 days' work in 2 years, and they consisted of a couple of hours each time at most. Her clothes, food, accommodation bills, and debts were paid for by Charles and the taxpayer. So let's think about how life must have been so difficult for her again. I have readers who tell me that they are losing their homes, their jobs, that family members have died, yet they carry on and do the best they can. The Harkles are seeking pity and sympathy in the wrong place. If Corden was the car crash, then Oprah is the explosion that follows. As March 31st approaches, the formal ties that the royal family had extended to the Sussex will cease, and Clarence House will no longer handle their mail. Charles apparently funds the correspondence service himself, which includes mail for the Cambridges, and that will come to an end. About time Charles actually did something, but is it enough? We all expected a release of trailers for the Oprah interview due to air March 7th, and CBS released the first two trailers, a stark contrast to the jovial jaunt Harry had with Corden. The mood is solemn, cue dramatic music, and enter a distressed-looking Harry, stating how tough and difficult life has been, and that he is relieved to have escaped the UK, it seems. Well, if that's how he feels, then most people in the UK will be happy if he stays in the US and doesn't come back. The despicable duo haven't a clue how pathetic they sound, whinging, moaning, complaining because they didn't get their own way, and people dared to criticize them for behaving rudely and like spoiled brats. What is worse is that they are insensitive to the rest of the world where people are struggling to survive, yet they deal another deck of victim cards. Their pleas of pity me are getting tiresome, but they seem to need pity to survive. Otherwise, how can they thrive when no one tells them how brave they are? Maybe they need a talking doll or dog that tells them how wonderful they are each day and that they are loved. That will save the world a lot of money and quite possibly help many with their mental health issues, where the Sussexes are driving people insane. How dare they do this as the abominable ingrates put on their best I'm a victim faces and poses. They have had 2 years to perfect this. Well, Prince Philip is, maybe in his last days, although we hope not, in hospital at nearly 100. His time will be limited, and this is how his selfish grandson behaves. I hope that he did summon Charles to the hospital and tell him to sever ties with Harry as his dying wish. Philip wasn't perfect, but he was loyal to the nation and is a devoted father. What the duo are choosing to do through organizing these interviews that sully the nation and tarnish the reputation of the royal family is wholly disrespectful. Anyone with active brain cells can see that this is wrong on so many levels, and the fact that they are making money from this is disgusting and disgraceful. And let's find out what Canadians think about the monarchy. It's not good news for the royal family. This is from Research Co. Only 22% of Canadians would prefer to have Prince Charles becoming king after Queen Elizabeth dies or abdicates. In the online survey of a representative national sample, 45% of Canadians say that thinking of Canada's constitution, that they would prefer to have an elected head of state, up 13 points since a similar research company poll conducted February 2020. 1 in 4 Canadians would rather see Canada remaining a monarchy, while 19% do not care either way, and 13% are undecided. You know who else is very upset? Taylor Swift. Yes. She has a miserable life with only her millions of devoted fans, the Swifties, and her, $400 million in riches. Apparently, it is still legal to poke fun at Taylor Swift. The pain. This is from Deadline. Taylor Swift is calling out Netflix young adult drama series Ginny and Georgia over what she called a lazy, deeply sexist joke made about her dating life. The line with which Swift took issue came in an episode during a conversation between Georgia, played by Brianne Howie, and her teenage daughter Ginny, Antonia Gentry, on whether Ginny had moved on from her boyfriend Marcus. What do you care? You go through men faster than Taylor Swift, Ginny snapped. Swift fans quickly denounced the line on social media, and Swift herself responded on Twitter. Hey, Ginny and Georgia, 2010 called and wants his lazy, deeply sexist joke back. How about we stop degrading hard-working women by defining this horse shit as funny? And for some reason, the third and fifth letter of that word are capitalized. Also, Netflix, after Miss Americana, this outfit doesn't look cute on you. Broken heart. Happy Women's History Month, I guess. I think that whenever Taylor Swift complains about anything, the response should be to play the video that she made for her song We're Never, Ever, 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 Ever Getting Back Together. I don't know how anyone can recover from such an embarrassment as that. And I think that Taylor Swift needs to be reminded of this on a regular basis. Oh, poor Taylor Swift. Yeah, I don't know. I think she's doing well. Interesting story from Associated Press about Cyprus. A man has been charged with uttering threats and causing a disturbance after barging onto the grounds of Cyprus's public broadcaster to protest what he said was the country's blasphemous entry into this year's Eurovision Song Contest, police said Sunday. Police told AP the man, who hasn't been named, was released after being charged with 4 counts, including being verbally abusive. What, that's a crime in Cyprus? Police said witnesses to Saturday's incident told investigators the man verbally accosted employees outside the Cyprus Broadcasting Corporation's news department. He was apparently upset that the broadcaster had selected the song El Diablo, the Devil, performed by Greek singer Elena Sagrinrou, to represent Cyprus. He said it was an affront to Christianity. Amateur video of the man confronting CYBC staff showed him screaming at a number of employees in the yard, asking how they could justify supporting such a song. The title of El Diablo, as well as its lyrics, I gave my heart to El Diablo because he tells me I'm his angel, have touched a raw nerve with some in the East Mediterranean island nation who consider it to be fraught with satanic connotations. Golly, I can't imagine why they would come to that conclusion. According to the Cyprus News Agency, an association representing theologians who teach in high schools expressed their disgust over the song and called for it to be withdrawn because it pledges lifelong and devotion and love for Satan. The agency also reported that the broadcaster received threatening phone calls that it would be burned down because of the song. The far-right Elam political party issued a statement saying even if the song's lyrics are metaphorical, it attacks and insults our faith in a shadowy way. Others, meanwhile, took to social media to heap scorn on El Diablo as a good song, defended as simply a ditty about a scorching love affair, or to label its detractors religious zealots. You ever seen the European song competition? There are more people than you would suspect who are absolutely obsessed with this, who devote large parts of their life. I have been shown videos of this, and to quote or to paraphrase Bret Easton Ellis, watching Eurovision is like stepping into a puddle of AIDS. There's a story on Newsweek that, actually cheered me up. It's by Bridget Foley, described as a novelist living in Boise, Idaho. She writes, when my husband and I first visited Idaho prior to moving here from Washington State, we arranged to meet a local friend of my brother's in a park. It was summer, hot already, even though it was early, but the park was shady and quiet. Waiting for my brother's friend, we sipped our drinks while our kids played alone on the playground. But then they started arriving, children in twos and threes, on bikes and on foot. Some with parents, but most, and this was significant, without. They swarmed the playground, enveloping our children. They began spontaneous games, making up rules as needed. Without supervision, they negotiated turn-taking on the monkey bars, who was supposed to go next at the water fountain, and who, by rights, should be it. By the time my brother's friend arrived, there was nothing he could tell us about life in Idaho that the presence of those children in the park had not already taught us. This was a place we wanted to be. My husband and I had struggled for years in California, then Pennsylvania, and finally in Washington to give our children what we believed to be normal developmental milestones. Everywhere we went, it seemed like small acts of childhood independence, like waiting for a school bus, walking to school, and riding a bike to a friend's house had been slowly phased out of normal life in every town we lived in prior to moving here. What has replaced them? Near constant adult supervision. Instead of stomping their feet to stay warm at the bus stop in the morning, children climb directly from the idling cars of their parents onto the bus. Play dates are arranged a week in advance in text exchanges coordinating the schedules of 4 working parents. Fully grown adults follow their children onto playground equipment rated for 12 and under, lest they let their progeny out of their sight for a single instant. In the suburbs of Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Philadelphia, the problem isn't that the children do not play in their front yards. The problem is they don't even play in their backyards. And it is not because those backyards are unsafe, but because their parents could be deemed neglectful simply for allowing their children to go outside beyond their direct purview. And what do the children learn from all this parental anxiety? That the world is dangerous, when the truth is that it is safer than it has ever been, and that they cannot trust themselves to do almost anything, safely cross the street, talk to an adult, or settle an argument with a peer. But these are skills that are just as foundational as literacy or numeracy, and the communities that do not foster them early are failing their children. After that first remarkable park visit, we started driving back west, already making plans to lay down roots in that remarkable place. While still in Idaho, both my husband and I noted the ubiquity of youth. It was not just the school-aged children who we saw in the park and on the streets. We'd been served by teenagers at restaurants and car washes and had seen middle schoolers negotiate awkward moments of searching for change to make a purchase at gas stations or grocery stores. In Idaho, children are fully integrated into daily life. It was only when juxtaposed with what we saw on our visit that it became obvious how much children have been shuffled off the stage of public life in much of America. There are a few working teenagers in Seattle, and no good parent would send their child out on errands in San Francisco, but those cities are poorer for that. When we speak of free-range children, we envision young ones at the park, but low-stakes first jobs at ice cream parlors and fast food joints, along with small forays into the economy like picking up milk for your mom, are just as important to building secure children. We should protect these opportunities for older children just as vigorously as we defend their right to an education, since in truth, an education is precisely what these types of jobs are. After almost a year of lockdowns, I understand that most parents probably yearn for the old surveillance-style parenting they were once free to employ out of the house. But as we return to normal, parents in cities and their surrounding suburbs should realize that what they considered normal was anything but. We can only stem the tide of surveillance childhood, Foley concludes, by preserving childhood independence where it still exists. And maybe someday independent children will return to the cities like the once endangered falcons who now roost on the eaves of skyscrapers and swoop through the air, exulting in their freedom. You know, I first noticed this phenomenon in the late 1990s. I lived in Kerrisdale in Vancouver, which was literally on the wrong side of the tracks from the neighborhood known as Shaughnessy, which is one of Vancouver's oldest and richest areas. And Shaughnessy is a delightful place to walk because the homes are handsome and not disgusting. And the streets curve in all sorts of directions, you know, not a lot of right angles. And so I spent many hours walking in Shaughnessy, sometimes walking all the way down to 16th and Granville. And I noticed something. No children. I would be there at different parts of the day, and I never saw any children. You know, when I pass by backyards and I think, oh, maybe they're playing in the backyards. No children playing in the backyard. So what are they doing? Is it they're not allowed a moment's privacy? They have to be watched at all times? So it's a year of lockdowns and a year of paranoia and panic. The children are suffering this on top of the total lack of independence and privacy, which they have suffered for decades now. This is going to be one screwed up generation for sure. Random Number Generation says coastal boomers are a plague. Hickman Warrior says, agree, physically nauseating. I cannot stand to talk to urban fembots. Jaakko Raipala says, Finland won Eurovision once with a rock song, but it was kind of a joke. Hard rock hallelujah. Spontaneous party that erupted in Helsinki was almost as big as winning the Ice Hockey World Championship. It's sad. One of the things I learned, I have a child who loves Eurovision. One of the things I learned is that the performers in Eurovision are not allowed to play live. They have to mime to recordings. What is the point of that? Oh, if they had to play live, they would actually have to demonstrate some musical or vocal ability, I suppose. Okay. Were there ever rock acts on Eurovision? Well, of course, ABBA famously won with their song Waterloo. But that was back in the 70s, the early 70s, in fact. I'm going to talk about music now, and I'm going to talk about Edward Elgar and the Renaissance of English music. The English, for a very long time, were considered to be, well, non-musical. I'm reading from a piece here by Stephen Jones called Das Land ohne Musik. That means the land without music. It's what the Germans used to describe England. Hector Berlioz wrote in 1851, there is no city in the world, I'm sure, where so much music is consumed as London. Now, yes, the English were consumers of music, but they were not writing the music that they were listening to. Well, not classical music at any rate. We have this 1840 comment by Heinrich Heine, who was certainly a great poet, but he was an exceedingly nasty man, a blackmailer, in fact. Heine wrote, "These people, the English, have no ear either for rhythm or music, and their unnatural passion for piano playing and singing is thus all the more repulsive. Nothing on earth is more terrible than English music, save English painting." Sounds more like racial animus than anything else. And let's see. Holman writes, "This agenda is part of a larger one that has more to do with 19th century cultural politics and with a proper balanced evaluation of the total corpus of 18th century music. It privileged what was perceived as the center, Italy, Germany, and Austria, over the supposed periphery, Scandinavia, Eastern and Central Europe, France, the Iberian Peninsula, and England. It privileged instrumental music, especially those genres that used Viennese sonata form over vocal music. And it privileged the work of the professional secular male in concert music over all others, such as church musicians, amateurs, and women. The most persistent observation on musical life in 18th century England is that it was dominated by Handel and other immigrant composers, the implication being that native composers were too feeble, parochial, or conservative to offer them much competition." Well, let's see. English music reached great heights during the Elizabethan era with composers like Thomas Tallis and William Byrd and John Dowland and Henry Purcell. Purcell died in 1695. And so what do we have after that? Well, we have roughly 200 years where English music was dominated by foreigners, by Germans, actually. George Friedrich Handel was a German who moved to London in 1712, and he's considered an English composer, but of course he wasn't. He was German and studied in Italy. So one of the most curious things in modern history is that Handel has become enormously popular in recent decades, popular by classical music standards. His operas, of which prodigious number of them had lain neglected for centuries, and now it seems that there are recordings, or several recordings, of all of them. But we see after 1950 a tremendous increase in interest in Baroque music. Another German who was enormously popular in England was Johann Christian Bach. He was called John Bach in England. He is the youngest son of Johann Sebastian Bach. He is sometimes called the English Bach, or the Italian Bach, or the Catholic Bach. There has been a tremendous revival of interest in his music in recent years, and I'm familiar with a great deal of it, and in no way is he as substantial as his father or his brother Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. But I think his music is delightful. Particularly, it's easy enough to find recordings of his symphonies, say. And of course, J.C. Bach is immortalized because he met Mozart when Mozart came to England as a boy. That Mozart would sit on J.C. Bach's lap, and they would play at the piano and compose. And Mozart's, I believe, first 4 symphonies are essentially a collaboration between J.C. Bach and the young Mozart. Joseph Haydn, near the end of his life, after he was released from his duties to the Esterhazy family, he made 2 visits to England, where he created a sensation and, among other things, wrote the set of symphonies, which is known as the London Symphonies, or sometimes people call them the Salomon Symphonies, after the publisher. Haydn made an enormous amount of money in England, and he was very grateful to the country for that. And he urged his friend, Mozart, to go to England because he was sure that Mozart would be as successful, if not more so, than he had been. But I suppose Mozart had had his fill of touring as a boy and was not interested in it. Now, Arthur Sullivan, who lived from 1842 to 1900, is the best known English composer of the 19th century. He sought a serious career in classical music, but it is for his operettas, which he wrote with William Gilbert, that he is known today. And Arthur Sullivan was a little bitter about this, despite the fact that he thought that composing with Gilbert was beneath him, demeaning, even though the operettas that they wrote together, they made him rich and beloved in England. But I suppose you could look at Sullivan's career as sort of proof, or was deemed as proof that serious music, that the English were incapable or had lost the ability of writing serious music. Mendelssohn was enormously popular in England in the 19th century. He was by far the most popular composer, far more so than Beethoven. But I suppose by around 1900, Mendelssohn's works were thought to be, for want of a better word, corny. Mendelssohn has a problem in that his public life seems pretty blameless when compared to other composers, and I think because of that we have seen this story assume great proportions in recent years of his supposed love or lust for Jenny Lind, the Swedish nightingale. That seems to have been decided that Mendelssohn was so boring that we're going to have to sex him up. I don't know, perhaps it leads to more records being sold. Edward Elgar, who I suppose became the English composer, the Pomp and Circumstance marches, which, Land of Hope and Glory is based on one of them. And we learned last year that at the Promenade concerts that no, you can't sing the words to Land of Hope and Glory or William Blake's Jerusalem, set to music by Parry, because they're offensive somehow. Elgar was born in 1857. He died in 1934. It was a long struggle for him. He married a woman. He had to wait quite some time to marry his wife because his wife's family thought that English composer, he's never going to make a living at it. And Elgar lived under straitened circumstances and did small jobs, teaching jobs, and the like. He came to fruition with his Enigma Variations, which were published in 1899 and became a sensation, and in Germany too. And I suppose that once Elgar got the German stamp of approval, then he was considered to be accepted. When we speak of English music, we tend to think of pastoral music, and I suppose that one could say that the rise of pastoral music in England, it rather paralleled rather extraordinary cultural development in England, which was a return of the English interest in their own past, in their own culture, in their own traditions, in folk song and in folk lyrics. And again, you see this in so many of the composers that followed Elgar. Curious thing about these composers is that so many of them had names which were not, well, English. Frederick Delius, Arnold Bax, Gustav Holst, to name a few. Holst lived from 1874 to 1934. He was born Gustavus Theodor von Holst. And let's see, he came of a Baltic German stock. I suppose there must have been a considerable amount of pressure on him to change his name, even before World War I, when English opinion turned very strongly against the Germans. Holst is associated, I suppose, with primarily for the planets, but he wrote a great deal of music, which is great. Oh, here's another one, Edmund Rubra. It's not a very English-sounding name as well. If we look at other. George Butterworth, there's an English name, who is, I suppose, best known for setting Houseman's poems to music. And, well, there's I won't say Percy Grainger. He was actually an Australian. Another one of the pastoralists, although that is reductionist, is Ralph Vaughan Williams. And he was one of the composers who was most influenced by the English music of the past, which resulted in perhaps his two most famous pieces, Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis and The Lark Ascending. Yes, he wrote a one-act ballet, Job, A Mask for Dancing, and Village, Romeo and Juliet. And we also have a curious fellow, John Ireland, who lived from 1879 to 1962. But later we get one of the greatest British composers, Benjamin Britten, whose operas, including Peter Grimes, continue to be very successful on the stage. But after him, we get modernism comes to English music. Although Britain lived well into the modern era. Well, by 1950, say that English musical culture, particularly at the BBC, was strictly under the control of the modernists. The composer Bertolt Goldschmidt, who was a refugee from Hitler's Germany, came to Britain. And he discovered that he was pretty much a moratorium placed on his music because it was too traditional. But there's a happy ending to this story when Goldschmidt was in his 90s. He was rediscovered, and several recordings were made of his works. Very attractive music it is too. Modernism in British music, I find Peter Maxwell Davis and Harrison Birtwistle to be absolutely unlistenable, but others would disagree. The Scottish composer James Macmillan, born in 1959, is one of the few modern composers who can be said to be popular. That's to say, his records actually sell. The same thing happened in Britain as happened elsewhere in the world, where classical music was taken over by the Academy. The composers no longer had to write works which would be appealing to the public. They would turn out their serialist works, not having to care that no one was interested in listening to them, because their salaries were paid. I suppose Macmillan is a somewhat of a controversial character because he is openly religious, which is not the done thing in Britain. Thomas Adès has also had, who was born in 1971, has had a great deal of success as well, and particularly, well, the rather scandalous opera that he wrote called Powder Her Face, which is about the sad, lurid story of Margaret Campbell, the Duchess of Argyll. Yeah, and also I could point to Oliver Knussen, who died in 2018, and his works, Where the Wild Things Are and Higgledy Piggledy Pop, based on books by Maurice Sendak, have been tremendously successful. As for the future of classical music in Britain, I don't know. It's not looking very good. I mean, live performance, will it ever return? I mean, clearly, if if auditoriums are restricted to no more than 20% capacity, they can't make money. I mean, the arts are heavily subsidized by government in Britain, but I don't think there would be much popular support for continuing these subsidies when so very few people are going to be attending these concerts in the future. It's a sad thing, but I suppose we have decided that everything that is worthwhile in life can be taken from a screen, that even church services have been lost to us. We don't need that anymore. We've got Zoom. So let's take a look at the chat here. Half Galician says Eurovision used to sing in native languages. Now it's all in English. When we'll be able to go to the symphony, says Ogan's Iron. Yeah, again, I don't know. I wouldn't count on it. There have been high definition broadcasts from the Metropolitan Opera for a number of years now, shown at movie theaters. I suppose that, if one lives in a city like Victoria, which has had these broadcasts, well, yeah. But, one would prefer to go. I think the reason that opera has been more successful recently than symphony concerts is because the opera is now, as it was in the past, an opportunity to show off, to demonstrate one's conspicuous consumption, that there is no cachet in going to the symphony anymore, but there still is going to opera. And many people who have no interest whatsoever in opera go there because they want to see and be seen. Yako Paula says English was an advantage even before that, but everyone hates the English, so they don't win votes. Ireland was the non-hated country that sang in English, so they were the most successful country. Jeffrey Pye says, what is your feeling about Copeland? Do you know Quiet City? I do know that. I'm sort of lukewarm on Copeland, and it may have something to do not with his music, but with his personality and his life, which was, sordid, even by composer standards. So, what's coming up on the show? On Thursday, on Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about Michelangelo Antonioni's Blow Up from 1966, a visually dazzling film. That someone was arguing me on Twitter over the weekend that film isn't good dealing with philosophical subjects. Well, I disagree. What is Blow Up about? Well, I guess it's about empirical evidence. How do we know what we know? On March the 11th, I'm going to be talking about an Irish movie from John Michael McDonagh called The Guard. On March the 18th, I'm going to be discussing the two Valley of the Dolls films. They're not great films, no, but I find them, significant in various ways. And the first one is often hilarious, although this is clearly not intended. Excuse me. You see what happens when a prestige product goes wrong. On March the 25th, a movie by Jean-Luc Godard from 1967, before he became a Maoist and went crazy, called Weekend. And on April the 1st, a movie from 2 years ago by Andrew Patterson called The Vast of Night. The book club. On March 5th, Friday, I'm going to be talking about Boomers, the men and women who promised freedom and delivered disaster by Helen Andrews. About halfway through it now, and it is a very good read. March the 12th. Do you remember when libertarians were going to take over a state, an American state? Well, there's a book about that by Matthew Hongoltz-Hetling called A Libertarian Walks into a Bear. Yes, a bear, not a bar. On March 19th, Tom Wolfe's book about Miami, Back to Blood. On March the 26th, The Coming of Neo-Feudalism by Joel Kotkin. On April 2nd, The Children of Men by the great P.D. James. They made a movie of that and essentially reversed the message. On Music Monday, coming up on March the 8th, I'm going to be talking about Big Star, The Beautiful Losers. This is a band who made only 3 records. And the third one, some people don't even want to call it a Big Star record. But they are now beloved. They have been a cult figure for decades, but they have proved to be tremendously influential. I mentioned Haydn. I'm going to be talking about his life on March 15th, a true underdog story. On March the 22nd, I'm going to be talking about authentic classical performance and how much I detest it and how phony I think it is. And on March the 29th, I'm going to be discussing the rise and fall of the producer. And by the producer, I mean the popular music producer. We see with Phil Spector and George Martin, the producer assuming a godlike quality. And now producers are, when you see popular records, which sell a lot of copies or streams or whatever, and they have 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 different producers on them. It tells you that the producer's role is not the same as it was, that they are expected to, not work with a band in order to bring the best out of them. They are expected merely to churn out the hits. So, we got an argument about Britain. Hi, Kevin. What can you tell me about Carl Gustav Mannerheim? Is he a figure to be admired? I think so. I very much think so. Neil Terry says, the local classical station did a nice tribute program of Edward German last night. Oh, yes, there has been interest in him in recent years. His work's rather similar to that of Gilbert and Sullivan. Okay, let's wrap it up here. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be exceedingly appreciated at this time, my PayPal account is attached to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada and wish to make a donation to this live stream, this can be done via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.